So I'm working, as we all are, off the same photograph here, okay? Let's just think about proportion, folks. When we look at how much space do these boats take up actually in the painting itself. I'm going to show you, I've painted this scene before and I dug it out yesterday. I thought I couldn't find it. But let me just show you it. This is one way of painting this scene, okay? And look at how much smaller the boats are in my scene compared to the, I have to move that out the way, otherwise it'll all get a bit messy, compared to what's actually in the photo, okay? I don't really see the necessity to make the boats here so big. There was something when I looked at this that felt a little bit overpowering, a little bit sort of too heavy, if you like. So when I did this, I scaled down the boats a little bit, and that gave me a little bit more room for other things. So I think I'm going to stick with that idea. So remember the grid, okay? Let's always start with the grid in mind, because it helps you make decisions like that. Helps you make those sort of assessments as to how big you want everything, where you want to place everything. I know you probably can't see those lines, folks, but you have to envisage them. And I don't draw them in unless I'm doing a demonstration like this. I just envisage them. But you know, same as every time. Two equally spaced verticals, two equally spaced horizontal lines. Gives us these junctions here. So I look at this focal, I look for the focal point. It can't really be the buildings because they're up here somewhere. And I will probably bring them down a little bit anyway, but we can't make a focal point up there at the edge of the paper, okay? So, but what we can do, we could still choose to have this boat here as the focal point because it sits approximately there, look, on one of the 4 positions, those 4 positions being the best place to position our focal point, okay? But we could also use the front end of this barge here. So the options are there basically. And quite often, this might sound a bit strange, but quite often I won't make that decision until I've get a feel for how the paint is working. In some situations, I will say, yeah, there's the focal point. I'm not going to shift from that. But in situations like this, we have options. It could be that boat because it's on one of these junctions, but it could also be this boat, the end, and I'm talking about the front end of the boat. We can't make much of a blue tarpaulin, but we can make something of the glass window end, the front end of this vessel, as we can this one. And that's why I'm attracted slightly more to this one at the back. It's got a bit more about it. It's got a bit more definition. As nice as the blue canvas covering on this boat is, it's a nothing area really, other than color. So bring this back again and show you. So I mean, you could sort of use either, and I did on this one end up going for the front, this boat here, the front end of this boat here, because you can see just how much I played back the other boats. There's just a hint of something going on this boat. So what I'm going to say is let that decision arrive rather than force it, okay? I'm going to try to make it this one this time, but if I have to change, and that's the nature, I learned this years ago with watercolor. Yes, if there's a place where you've got to keep the focal point, then you've got to, the end of, you know, you can't, a situation you can't argue with. But whenever there's an opportunity to keep your options open, grab it with both hands. It just makes the whole process a little easier on you, less pressure, and you know, just allow the outcome, because this is, as I say, this is watercolor. Right, let me just grab a straight edge And the next thing I want to bring your attention to is the importance of how we must get that line here. I've got a straight edge here, a little red piece of plastic. If this is flat water, of course, that line there at the base of the boats must be spot on. You can't put the bottom of the boat behind up here, say, like this, only for the bottom of this nearer boat on the left to be slightly higher. It's not on the same parallel line, okay? It must be, or baseline, ground line, water line, whatever you want to call it. It must sit on the same. And this is why I encourage you for today to actually use a straight edge like this. So let's make absolutely sure now, or as sure as we can, the line at the base of those boats. Okay, I mean, you can draw them out by hand, you know, don't worry, but I'm bringing the straight edge to your attention for this very reason, that how important it is to get that right. There is an angle, isn't there? If the back water line is very near horizontal, okay, so the angle of this canal comes from the nearer bank, this bank down here, okay? That is not perfectly horizontal. You can tell just as I hold that there, that would be horizontal from one side of your paper to the other. There's a couple of millimeters, and that's all it takes to give you a hint of an angle back here. So that's what I'm going to go with. I'm going to say, if that's horizontal, then just a lifting of this right-hand edge here should give me the line at the bottom of those vessels. Now I'm going to, from here on in, you're on your own. The stabilizers come off the bicycle at this point, and you've just got to say, right, okay, I've got the all-important flatness of the water here. We decide then that this is one potential area for the front end focal point of this barge here. Now, there's a problem I see a lot when people are dealing with boats. They make the hulls much too deep this way, much too high off the water, making it look like an ocean-going liner if you're not careful. I've done it myself. I have to keep in check all these things all the time. So, just be aware that this is quite a short measurement. Sorry, this one here, the vertical, the side of the boat, the hull of the boat, of the barge. It's quite a shallow measurement. If you go too high, too deep, as I say, you'll have something that's more akin to an ocean-going liner. Now, I don't put a hard edge line down the back of that boat because it'll be affected by light. You won't see it. We'll have some dark around there. But that height measurement there is very, very important. Now, so it's a box. Look at that. If I take off the angle off the front end, it's just a rectangle. It's just a rectangle with a slightly angled front end like that. And then the top with the canopy on it, the blue canvas, is also just another box. So we'll put another box on top of there. There's a slight angle off the back there. I'm talking about the blue tarpaulin. And then the tarpaulin seems to sort of stop about here, somewhere like this. Now I'm going to draw this in a lot heavier so you can see. So here goes. There's the tarpaulin shape, something like this. There's the back end of this barge, which I don't really want to put a hard line on, if I'm honest. There's the gunnel line, the top of this barge, and there's the water line there, where the barge meets the water. Now there's windows on the front, and all they are is a shallow little sort of shadow little ovoid like that, an ellipse. Okay, we know that the window is probably square. We probably know that it's got a square horizontal at the top of that window, but from the side and the angle that we're looking at, it's the central window on that is just an ellipse. This one to the side is slightly more open like this. Again, like a sort of an oval. Now I'm looking at the front end, and I think I've come too far back. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to chop that there. Okay, that's better. So let's get the eraser, get rid of that. And that's a better, I think that's a much better, a much more barge-like looking vessel for having a much shorter, blunt front end to it. Okay. There's ever such a slight little bend up there at the front there. Okay, so that's all we have to do. Look at it, it's so simple. It's just an oblong, a rectangle on top of a rectangle, okay? And we hint the windows by some slightly abstract square shapes that look more like sort of ovoids. They look like, it's almost egg-shaped in a way, isn't it? And that's certainly an ellipse, like a bicycle wheel turned at an angle, if you like. And in the real world, of course, they're really quite square, but that's what happens when we see things from certain angles. Okay, and now directly behind is the second vessel. We take our, so let me just make something really clear here. If I'm not copying exactly the angle of the boats, because look, we can see a lot more of the central window here, but I know for a fact that if I start opening this up and angling this shape towards us, it won't be so acute in its shape. It won't be so hard of edge, and the harder edges are going to look better. If we start suggesting that we can see down onto from a higher angle, this all becomes softer in shape. If you see things at profile, you get their most interesting shapes. I don't know whether you've ever noticed, if you've studied the work of, there's a lot of popular watercolorists out there at the moment, like this book Vitch and people like this. And whenever they're painting man-made objects, particularly cars, they're nearly always catching these vehicles or putting them in their paintings straight on, coming straight towards you, very rarely turning away at an angle, because they simply don't offer quite as interesting a shape at these angles. They look softer. It's always good to have, as I say, as dynamic a shape as possible. Okay, let's now put in the vessel behind. Now this one's going to appear shorter, isn't it? Because it's that bit further away from us. So it's something like this. We don't know exactly what's going on back there. There's no point in us fussing with actually how that end of that boat meets the other one, because that will be such a played down soft area that we won't need to worry about the shape, the exact shape back there. And again, it's just an inference of what's happening. So it'll does have a sort of similar window here. We do see a little bit more of this one because we're at a shallower angle again. So we see a little bit more of the windows on this one behind than we have here. Okay. And then it peters out. It has a back, actually has another canopy at the back there. Now if we go putting in this extra bit of information of this canopy on the back end, I think it's going to be screaming focal point at us because it's now got more about it than this barge here. But the options are still there to suit ourselves when we get there. That's the great thing about that's one good thing about the painting in the loose style. Has many challenges, but there are also other areas that allow for some considerable artistic license, and you should really grab them. So there's our other boat. Now there's a hint of something behind there. I don't even know what it is. It could be a landing platform, a mooring platform, whatever. It doesn't matter. We probably won't make much of that anyway. And at this end, there is just, if you look at the here, there is absolutely no point in putting in this red boat, the front end of this red boat here, it just wouldn't be, it's not going to do anything for the painting, the balance of things. I mean, you can hint upon an abstract shape there, which is, let me show you this painting again. You can hint, I drew it in originally here, but I played it down. There's just a hint of some shape there. That's all, nothing else. Nothing anywhere near, what it's the information that we're getting in the actual photo. I don't want any of that at all. It's something like that, isn't it? The baseline of that would be about here. But we're going to play that out because it's going to be in the shady recesses of this overhanging tree that we're going to put in here. So the overhanging tree is around here somewhere, falls over the back of this boat with the blue canopy. Now, what I do like is the idea of putting in a hint of this little building back here. There's two buildings. So I'm just going to make sure we've got a suggestion of those. Something like this. These are only boxes, remember, that's all buildings are. Just you could put it in a square box like this. Another one behind it, gable end. Something like that. And something like that. And how, again, how much we use these buildings when we get there, we'll decide when we get there. So we don't have to fuss about them. Just pencil them in roughly for the moment as to where they are. And the only other thing, and remembering that this is all about nailing the movement of this painting, okay? Needs to be up a little bit, that. Even though I've penciled that in with a straight edge, that is still a little bit higher than it should be. So I'm just, sorry, lower than it should be. So I'm just going a little bit higher there. So now that we've got all this, that will be shaded. In the next couple of lessons, folks, I'm going to be doing more about the importance of drawing out thumbnail sketches before we start painting and how important they are for your tonal values, for shapes and tonal value. Sorry, so the movement, what completes the movement of this painting is the near bank down here. It comes in about here somewhere and just comes out of the painting about the head there. Now, this is probably a slightly different ratio size-wise, you know, width to height. So you've got to take that in consideration too. If I were to say, well, look, you know, the photo says the this little near riverbank or canal bank comes in at this point on the right, disappears about here on the bottom line. That wouldn't work on here because we've got a slightly wider ratio than is actually the photo, than in the photo. So I can promise you that would look really wrong if we did that tight angle. So you have to take every situation on its own merit and make it look good. And that's all it is at the end of the day. You make it work in your painting. I would even say it probably needs to come right the way over here before it goes, before the bank disappears. So that, I think that looks better. So we're faced with asking ourselves, does that look right? Is that correct there? That sort of expanse of water. Does it look like it's flat? I think it does. Yeah, I think it does. Okay. Right, now the flat bank, it'll have a surface to it that does something like that. If you think about it, if we were to walk on this, need to know the flatness of these surfaces. So I think the flatness would look something like this. And I think we're probably ready to get some paint going here now. So I wouldn't draw this as hard as I've drawn mine. but this is so hopefully that you can see what I'm doing here. So come down a little bit there, maybe. I'm a bit mucky with the pencil, so just erase some of that there. All right, okay, folks, let's get some. So there's nothing in the water, okay, but you could if you wanted to. I think something that's really important and what really makes this painting is the reflections, okay? Excuse me. You look at how these reflections break up this huge area. This area of water is massive. And here's the opportunity to do something really eye-catching. If I pencil around the outline of the reflections, there's something like this. I won't worry whether these are absolutely exact, but they do something like this. And it's really interesting. If you study the photo, comes around here, something like this, sort of makes a return back here, but there. So all this is reflection, okay? And then this is all light reflected sky area. And what we'll get is that playoff between these strong shapes, reflected shapes against the reflected sky, all on the within the water surface. So those are extremely important notes to be picking up on. And now I'm still trying to make sure that the bottom of my barges speak to each other, that they're on the same bit of water. But there, and there. I think that looks to be okay. Yeah, sorry. And there was one other thing I thought was quite curious about this. If you look at the photo and you look at the reflections that are in the water, the reflections, interestingly enough, suggest that there are trees all the way along there behind the boats. And what that is, I'm pretty certain what that is, it's just the reflections of darker things around. It may even be as far back as behind the houses. It's the woodland right back there that we can't see, but that's what's giving us the reflection here. But then it's what's also curious is if that's the case, you know, how come the blue is reflected in the water as well? Well, I think we just got to take it literally. That's exactly what we're seeing. It's just odd that we don't see the houses, and it must be to do with the trajectory of where we're stood and where we took this photo, that you don't see the houses, but you do see the woodland behind the houses. You do see the blue reflection of the canopy because it's so close. But it's things like this are always worth, you know, observation, worth the note. So let's get painting. And here's something I haven't mentioned for a long time. Painting in the loose style, we use reference. There's nothing wrong with using photo reference unless we're lucky enough to get out when the weather permits and paint out of doors. But at some point in every painting, when I'm using a photograph, it becomes no more photograph, and it's all about the painting. So in other words, you might get as far as putting in all the big shapes. You may even start working off the photo still for some details. But there will come a point, as there does in every painting, where it's no longer about the photo. So you need to throw it away. You need to discard the photo, because the more you force it to look like the photo, the more likely, the higher, effectively incredibly highly likely, that painting will go wrong, because you simply won't be able to do every color and nuance that's in the photo. So it must become the painting and not the photo at some point in every painting. Right, starting off with the 1-inch flat. And although I have fresh paint out, as always, in these wells, okay, but in these dried out wells here, yesterday's painting or the day before's painting, and paint is still in it, so they dried out. Now I can use that, it's okay. It's not a problem. But when I move through this, it will require fresh paint.
So before we begin, please consider subscribing to my YouTube channel, and if you want immediate notifications as and when I upload new videos, then do please remember to click on the bell icon.
So let's just get something down, okay? And I'm picking up this, as I say, it's probably a bit of ultramarine blue from yesterday. Might have a little contamination in it from burnt sienna, but not much. It is mostly ultramarine blue. So I'll even come across here. Look, this is fairly, the only area I'm going to stay out of is directly above the top of the field in front of the houses. I'll stay out of there. Okay, I can come into this area. I can even come across the boat with a quick swipe. I want you to leave the boats mostly free of any paint for now. Okay, but we can go around the boats, just at the back of the boats there. We can come down into here because we're just establishing. We're just this to me is like limbering up. This is, well, let's just get some paint moving. It can relax. You can sort of say, right, here we go. I feel more settled now. This is just some preliminary shots with the brush. So I'm staying out of my vessels, my little barges for the moment, okay? And I'm staying out of the field. I've left a little bit of white on the roofs of the house. Everything else has had this sort of slightly grayed down ultramarine blue. Now, I want you to stay out of, remember we said about the reflections. If you go through this water, I would just do a couple of very weak, watery crisscrosses just through here like that. Make it dry brush. If you do that really quickly and your arm is outstretched, you'll have a very light hit of paint over that surface, because we want to play that off. That must remain light and bright down here. But the other areas, we can put some paint into this near bank here. I say paint, it's nearly all water at the moment, and it's all the same color still. So now I'm going to put something in this area here, and it's going to be stronger. So we're going to see some color in here. So I'm picking up cerulean blue, adding it to this mixing area here. Put some ultramarine with it. Okay, cerulean, a little bit of ultramarine, and then I'm going to pick up a bit of the cadmium orange that was on the list. Okay, just a bit of cadmium orange. I'll try and show you the strength of this. It's actually quite strong. So ultramarine blue, cadmium orange in there. If you want a bit of cadmium red, go for it. It doesn't matter. It's just strengthens the color anyway. So what I want is a nice, strong, warm green. Okay, something like this. It's a bit more of that cadmium orange in there. Here goes. And this is very direct shape making. Let's think about these shapes, these tails on the reflections. Okay, if you want to start with those, absolutely fine. Keep them vertical like this. This is a very direct way of painting. Now, that's one green, isn't it? It's getting boring, look. It's just one green. So I'm going to pick up a little bit more of the orange for the next area. And I'll put a little bit of this somewhere back there where I've already been. Now, in a moment, you'll see me change this green again. And let's put a bit more blue in it this time. Let's have a little bit of that green, that phthalo green. Okay, so just picked up a tiny bit of the phthalo green, and before this gets a chance to dry off, just watch what I do with the handle of the brush for a moment. I'm suggesting that there'd be ripples at the edge of this reflection. So just push them out sideways a little bit here and there. Let's complete. So I haven't even gone up to the boat yet. I'm not so worried about that. It's all about this edge here, the shapes that at the edges of our reflections. So change this green. Comes up here. I'm not copying the photo exactly. I'm thinking to myself, it'd be great, it'd be far more interesting if we brought a little bit of a peak area down by here somewhere. And then it sort of seems to come back on us about here a little bit. And again, put some edges on that reflection in places. Now we can fill in everything that we haven't done, everything else. So just pick up the same colors. We'll have, we do need to keep the light in front of the boat. Okay, so just at the front end of the boat here, we'll keep a sort of vertical line, if you like. And then between the boats here, there will be a gap. So even though it's not a carbon copy reflection of the barge in the water here where my finger is, but it is enough to suggest that this is a reflection of the boat in this area. Okay, so we leave that white paper for the moment anyway. And now I think we can sort of creep into the area back here. This is on my paper now, this is still wet, okay? So this is why it's so important to work quickly, because if you want these effects, if you want your painting to look like this, you've got to be doing that thing of working wet into wet as much as possible. If you work too slowly, you'll be working wet into dry and it won't cut it. You won't get this type of effect. And the strange thing is that when people remark about, oh, you work fast, it doesn't, when you do it regularly, it does not feel like you're working fast at all. In fact, I often think, I've slowed down and I need to speed up again. So it's just, I think it's a lot to do with confidence. The more you do, the quicker you work. Now, what about the field? I think the field should receive a very pale mix of phthalo green. I mean really, really watery phthalo green. I'll show you what I'm doing here. Picked up phthalo green here, and I put a little bit of the cadmium orange into it. Okay, that'll give me hopefully like a sunlit color for that area of field. But I'm going to try to do this in a single swipe of the brush, but try also to stay out of the broken top edge of the field back there. Okay, leave that broken paper back there. Now a little bit in between and over the tops. Whoops, just gone over the back there. Got to be careful of that. Just did what I told you not to do. Bring that down a little bit. I think that should be okay. I'm cutting around my vessels here. Now, this is where, you can have fun. So this is all still wet. This is the importance of working again, at this sort of speed is if this is still wet, that means wet in wet will give us some reflection of the colors that are in that field in these reflections. Even down here, just warm that up as well, just in here. Okay. Now we can relax. Just tidy that little area up over the top there for a moment. And down here. And we'll just let that settle a bit on the surface of the paper here. So all I'm doing is choosing areas where I think I could put this slightly warmer, more orangey yellow. I think we can put something very similar in color now across here, but it's very broad, large brushwork. I think what we do quite a lot of is we do too much work with, in our paintings in general, I mean, we do too much work with that little brush there and not enough work with this. I think often we're too keen to get to the small brush, to the detail. We get there too early, too soon, when we haven't done enough with the big brush. Okay, so let's make sure we're happy with the edges. This can be darkened up down here. Keep picking up the cadmium orange and the ultramarine blue. And I think I'm going to put a little bit of alizarin crimson in this nearer bank here, because it does needs a nice solid sense of sort of solid mass down here on this edge. Pull it together just there. Okay, again, we can sort of let this settle a little bit. So I'm still thinking about what I can do with the big brush before I start turning my attention to any small brush. I think we'll put the blue of the canopy of that boat in now, because it's a relatively large shape, okay? So I'm always looking to do the big shapes first, moving, you know, consecutively downwards or increasingly smaller. Start with the bigger shapes, move to the next bigger shapes, next bigger shapes, next bigger shapes, till you get down to something fairly small. Then it's time, only then it's time to bring out a small brush. So that's the canopy. I'm just picking up a little bit of cerulean blue, and I'm staying off the top gunnel of that vessel there, just staying. Look how look at the abstract shape of the blue, because that was cerulean blue. I'll pick up the ultramarine blue now, just either side of the brush here, like this, turning it over, and I'll just bring a little bit of that slightly darker ultramarine blue into the front end of this blue canopy. And it is a very abstract edge to this canopy that I'm making. Okay. Now there's the reflection of that, which I think we can find just at the edge of this reflection here, about here. And it's still wet. Now, if you're painting along and you're not up to where I am, you're not up to speed with where I am, I'd suggest you don't paint. I suggest that you don't put that blue in unless you're really with me on at this very moment. If that area is dry before you get there, you need to paint the rest of it and leave that reflection till later, when you can re-wet it with clean water, and then put the blue reflection in. Okay. Right, okie dokes. So where have we stayed out of so far? We've stayed out of most of the roofs, or a lot of the roof of the buildings. We've stayed out of the top edge of the field back there. There's a nice light horizontal line back there. We've stayed mostly out of the boats themselves, okay? Stayed out of the reflection immediately in front of the boats, and we've stayed out of this big abstract area of water right here in front of us. So I'm going to speed dry this. Just what I'm doing now, sorry, let me just explain. I'm just cleaning my brush off here so it doesn't dry out with paint in it. Put it back down there. What I'm doing with this tissue is I'm looking for potential cauliflower areas that will back run. I really don't mind some back runs in scenes like this, because you're bound to have, they form amazingly convincing natural shrub-like shapes on riverbanks. So I will actually encourage cauliflowers and runbacks in those situations. But there'll be some other areas where I think, well, I can't let it do that here or there. I mostly want my reflections, these nice reflected shapes here. They're like stalactites in a cave, aren't they? They sort of come vertically down in front of us, and they're good. You don't want those forming runbacks. So I'll take the runbacks away with a thirsty tissue. A runback in the blue canopy would look pretty good, would give that some sort of texture. Okay, now there are blues elsewhere, but for the moment, we'll just leave the blue in the canopy and slightly into the reflection in the water as well. And I'm going to speed dry this now, so bear with me, folks, while I turn this hairdryer on. Okay, and it's quite interesting, actually. I know that this painting is not going to look anything like the painting that I showed you that I did some time back. And that's absolutely right and normal. And I say that as a tip for everybody here. If you're looking at yours thinking it doesn't look like Howard's, then you're doing things right. You are doing things right. But what's really important is that you make it work now. You don't try thinking, I've done something wrong here and I must get it back to make it look like Howard's. That's really the wrong way to go. Okay, this is your painting. I would never look at this one and think, why isn't it looking like the one I did before? I quite like the one I did before, so why don't I just do the same? Because this is watercolor and it won't let you do it. You know, and that's what is so special about watercolor. It's very difficult to turn out two paintings the same. You can't say that really about other mediums. You know, other mediums, you can get a distinctly close result, providing you do A, B, and C the same way. Watercolor is not like that. You'll get some resemblance, but you should never fight for a copy. That's where it can go really wrong. Never fight for that. And that's along the same lines as what I was saying about the ditching the photograph at some point. There is a point in every painting where it's not about the photograph anymore. You'll just end up with problems if you think it is, you know. Right, so we just did everything to this point, okay, with that 1-inch flat brush. So now I'm going to turn my attention to the number 6 round brush, okay, and I'm going to do my usual trick of using a little lid here, just so you can see what I'm doing. I'm going to put a bit of ultramarine blue here, and I'm avoiding picking up any water from the well that I'm taking it from. So there's the ultramarine blue. Here's burnt sienna coming in, and I just put it here. So I'm sort of effectively having two little sticky areas of a lot of paint with very little water, if any. Sorry, let me hold it in place. There's the burnt sienna here. There's the ultramarine blue. Now watch what I do. If you place the brush between the two colors and roll them back and forth like this, rolling the brush as well, okay, like this, almost like if you've ever mixed one of these adhesives, epoxy 2-part adhesives, it's the same process. So there it is. That's a glue-like mix. Now this won't want to come off the brush. What am I going to do with it? Sorry, I'm going to start looking at my pencil work and saying, let's chase that line across there. And it very reluctantly comes off the brush. The second it stops coming off the brush, you need to find the tiniest amount of water to help that paint back off the brush. Sometimes it needs fresh paint only, and you'll get it to deliver the paint again. Now, this line, remember, it's so important that it's a continuation of the line of the front boat. Okay, so it's up here, something like that, as I see. It's amazing how a line like that suddenly puts form on these objects. So a tiny, tiny bit of water, the smallest amount of water. And this is what I was saying about some of our buildings, putting lines. This is a top edge now, okay? The line I just did was a bottom edge. It's where the boat meets the water, but this is a top edge. This is potentially a reflective surface. So I underline that shape there with a dark broken line, just the same sort of lines I used on the bottom of the boat. But I know that I can leave a slither of light on top of that line. If I'm careful, I'll be able to do that. And that's why the dark line and light line together, sandwiched, work. That's why they look better. Instead of, otherwise it just looks like some strange framework that you're placing around your objects. Now there's a, I will refer to the photo for ideas. I'm still using the photo for reference at the moment. I want to put a little bit of red in here. So I'm just going to go in this front end with a neat bit of alizarin crimson. But look how the line is broken, okay? It's a broken deposit, a broken delivery of paint here. Don't do too much down the back end of the boat. I think we should think about the continuation of this line in the next boat rather than look at these boats as separate entities. You almost got to think of them as connected items. It's one shape, not two shapes. By doing that, you'll keep continuity in your line work from left to right and right to left. Okay, so every time my brush is giving up its running out, I'm just reloading again. Now let's get these windows. I might just change the shape of that one a little bit. And it's perfectly okay to change shapes, change your mind about things, because the reason why you have to do that is because it takes only a millimeter of angle to be different from what you're referring to your photo for you to have to make things different. The side windows back here. As I say, I think the real problems occur when we're trying to force what's happening in the photo into our paintings when we should be making adjustments in our photo, in our paintings, sorry, God forbid. So just getting back here, there's some shapes on the bank back here. Don't know what these shapes are. Nobody can tell you what I don't know what they are. I really don't. It's some red object. Could be the back end of another vessel, another barge on the river. But that's not important as to what it is. What's important is that you do only enough to suggest there's something there. So keeping this theme going here of what's happening on the boats themselves. It's very dry, this paint, glue-like paint, taking a tiny bit of water from time to time. And in a moment, I'm going to take my attention to the few little houses in the back there. Now, I think with the rigger brush, I'm doing it now with the point of this brush, but with the rigger brush, we can infer some, I know there's sort of mooring ropes and things just hanging off the hull here. Right, what about this front area here that we said there is something here, but we don't know what it is? Well, I'm just going to suggest something that point, almost connects with this. It's just a bit of dry brush paint in there. Now the bank, it's quite important to know where the bank is behind the bottom of this boat, probably about there somewhere. And that's still a little bit low. So I'm just going a little bit higher on that line there. Yeah, let's have a look at these buildings then at the back. So just picking up ultramarine blue, burnt sienna. Let's go back. I'm going to pick up a tiny bit of water and put it in here. So I can use that for this sticky mix. So yeah, I'm going to outline these little buildings. Can't really see. There's all sorts going on back there. There's seems to be a row of bunting of coloured bunting, and there's even parasols. Not interested in that at all. That's not what this painting is about. So I'm just going to suggest that this little building's got a window or two in it. Simplify it, but I am going around the edges, the roof lines and places like that, with the odd window tucked in. Okay, now over the light again. Here we go again. It's that same thing, that same message. I'm talking about white lines, dark lines, dry brush areas. Remember, we deliberately left white paper along the top of the field. Well, in and around there, you can hit these little mini messages, these little hints of things occurring in the same area. Might be fences, might be figures even walking around back there. It doesn't matter what it is, as long as you make that interesting and you keep the idea going that it's a horizontal. Okay, I think we can sort of leave it at that for the moment. We'll need something on this bank here. So I'm still working dry brush, remember. This is still the dry brush paint application. So there it is, just to prove. I'm using my little pickle jar lid to keep this paint so dry. Now, if you're like me and this technique is fairly new to you, if the dry brush technique is fairly new to you, the likelihood is you're probably going to overdo it, because you'll get to grips with it and have fun, and it'll be like your best friend for a long time. Actually, it still is my best friend. It's a great technique. I love it. But what you've got to be careful of with all newly learnt techniques, we tend to go through a phase of overdoing them. So, but overdo them. That's what I would say. That's absolutely fine. You know, you use them and use them and use them and use them and overdo it, because eventually you will realize the point where you're overdoing things, and that's when the magic starts. That's when you start using it more thoughtfully and with more sensitivity. That's when it starts happening for you. So I just want some warmth actually in this front end. So I think I'll just pick up a little bit of pure burnt sienna just to give the front end of this boat some warmth, because when we do tease up to it with some water later to paint the hull, this warmth will leach into the boat hull. Okay, have I done enough of this dry brush technique? And this is definitely a technique, you know, that I rely on. I rely on it. I rely on it a lot. I know a lot of watercolorists use the dry brush technique, but I tend to sort of do it at this stage with the small brush, because the detail later seems to sort of, it just seems to look more natural when you go back into the areas with other washes. I'm not sure, you know, where I got it from, but I dare say I borrowed it from somebody else. I've forgotten since. Anyway, I think it's time now to go back to the big brush. And as it's 20 to 12, folks, I think we're going to have to agree by now. We're a year into these lessons. I think really an hour and a half is probably unrealistic. So we'll probably go over. I hope you can all stick with it. If you can't, of course, it will be available on the video when it's edited. So let's go back to the big brush. And now I'm going to work from the back to the front. So I'm going to go around those houses back there and change the tonal value. I'm starting with ultramarine blue, and I'm picking up a bit of cadmium orange. So it will be a bit warmer, but I'm going to put some cerulean blue in that now. So I'll just show you what I did there. So I'm looking at this area here immediately behind the buildings, okay? I picked up ultramarine blue. I then picked up cadmium orange, and it makes a lovely, beautiful, warm green. But I want that green to be a sort of powdery effect, and the cerulean blue gives that sort of powdery effect. There it is, and I roll the brush. I mix it thoroughly for now, and I push the brush back and forth like this to make sure that that brush is fully loaded. But remember this is one color only, okay? What I mean by that is that once I've put this thoroughly mixed paint behind my buildings, you'll see me go in with the components, those three colors, separately. So the mixing will happen on the paper. Cutting around my buildings. Now this is where I change the color, and I'll add a bit of water. Here comes cerulean blue on its own, just there, look. Why don't we leave some abstract sort of shape back here? And I think we probably have to go down the back of that little house back there somehow, like that, maybe. Okay, so we're painting the negative, aren't we, really, I suppose? And what about here then? Why don't we warm that up? We went cooler down there with the cerulean blue. So why don't we sort of hit this area with more of the cadmium orange in here like this? And this is where you can, as long as it's a big brush, you can manipulate that brush as much as you like. It's when we're doing this sort of thing with a small brush is where it all goes wrong. So a bit more of the blue in here. Cut that back a little bit better, perhaps. Okay. Now I've got other shapes, shapes that we need to make more interesting, because there are trees near this barge here that are darker and more shapely because they're closer, so we can see more of them. So I'm going to pick up a bit of Payne's grey. So there's the same color I was using a moment ago for this side here, for this area, okay? But I'm picking up and putting into that some Payne's grey. I think I need probably to warm this Payne's grey up a bit with, again, cadmium orange. Take some water from anywhere here, that will do. And we'll say that the tree over here looks something like this with its limbs poking up. It's the edge of the brush. Like this. Nice abstract. I think we need to come down to the front edge of the little barge here to show it off. And we'll go along the bank, again cutting back against the edge, front edge of the front edge. Getting my tongue tied. Cutting against the front end of this barge again here. And darkening out most of this back here in almost sort of crisscross brush marks, you know, it's very random back there. Now, if you've got a bit of credit card to hand, you can do a little bit of scraping through some of this wet paint. Just put some extra limbs here and there. what that gives us now, I mean, the way it's going, I'm pretty certain this is going to be my focal point territory again. So some areas back there that need softening, soft edges, hard edges around here because, well, a lot more hard edges around here because it's the focal point territory. Okay. Remember, we still got to do things on the boat itself. So I think we're okay here. I'm just making sure I'm happy with the angle of that window at the front end of that boat. I think we got to stop, but I'm now looking at the baseline near the houses, and I think that's got to go darker now. It's funny how the answers to other areas appear and reveal themselves because of what you've done somewhere else. And that's why we shouldn't stick with one area. We shouldn't stay in one place, painting the one spot until you think it's done. No way. You should really sort of say, well, I've put in what I wanted to see there for now. Move through your tones elsewhere. And then because by doing that, you suddenly realize that this dark now has to travel. It has to go through the horizontal back here somehow. So we'll say something like that. Okay. I think, again, for this very same reasons, I'm looking at this near bank and I'm seeing that that's got to be darkened. A bit of burnt sienna this time, I think, maybe a little raw sienna. And just make some more interesting shapes back here. Okay. Now, in a moment, we'll do a bit more, we'll do a little bit more line work in a moment, and then we'll finish it with just some very subtle shadow work, I think. Right, I want to do the boats now. I want to sort of get the boats more or less finished. So I'm now going back to the round brush where we were a moment ago. Haven't used the big, I put this on just in case, because sometimes when you're, if things dry out too quickly and you want a second brush, it's handy to have something like this on hand, you know, for making shapes back here as I'm doing now. But it was really there as a standby. I haven't really felt too much need for it. But had I start using one and not put it on the list, would have been rather amiss of me, and you'd probably been wondering what it was I was trying to do to you folks. Tell you where I can use it. See the back end of this building? It's such a hard edge, isn't it? Well, it wouldn't appear like that. So I'm just going to, what I did there, sorry, was I put it in the water and I squeezed everything out of it and I've made it like a paddle. See that? Made it like a paddle. And that's great for just teasing the soft edges into the distant parts of the furthest edges of the buildings. Over here on the right, over here on the left, just softening those edges. But what I want to do now, sorry, is with this brush, with just water in it for the moment, I'm going to land the brush here with water in it, and I'm going to jiffy it back and forth until I make the finest contact, the softest contact with that dry brush line that we put at the top of the boat. And if you see what's happening here, let me just zoom in for you a moment. Zoom in, just bear with me. It will go out of focus for a moment. I'll get you back in a minute. So what I'm doing is this. I'm taking clean water landing it in the hull of the boat here, okay, being careful not to go up to the paint of the dark line, but when I'm ready, going up to that dark line and teasing out some of that pigment, particularly around here. You're almost around the front end of the boat sort of thing doing this. And then to a lesser extent down here, let's go through this boat into the neighboring boat and do the same. Okay. Teasing out. I'll do it with the side of the hull of the boat too, not the front end of the boat, but the side of the boat. Again, leaving a little slither of light above the gunnel, just there. That's why we put the dark line in, to leave a little bit of white above it. And you'll need to do a little bit of the same round here at the edge of the blue canopy, into the white areas of the blue canopy. This is just a damp brush, making edges and areas look a little more natural. Okay. I managed to drip some water somehow off a brush handle, I think, so just get that off. Okay. Going to go a little bit darker in the buildings. Same brush, just roll the brush around here a little bit, so things are not looking too flat back there. Okay. Right. I think we need some color now in some of these windows. These windows are mostly dark because of the interior. And this one's a bit darker. They will catch light as well, so I'll probably leave just the front windows, the windows facing a 4, leave those white paper or something very similar, close to white paper. Okay, we're nearly there, folks. So I'm going back for a moment just to re-establish the dry brush. Back to the small brush. It's a small brush with a very good point, incidentally. It's got to have a really good point to it. Now that paint has got a lot of water in it since I've been picking up these watery mixes. Just going to make sure I've got something a bit drier happening here. And if it doesn't dry out rapidly, just use a bit of tissue. That'll dry the paint out a bit. So what am I looking at here? I'm looking at a little bit more information around the boat here, working dry into wet here. Dry into wet. I think that needs to come down a tad here. We have things like fenders, buoys, whatever you want to call them, right at the water's edge here too. So area there. Sometimes I line off the roof in places. Okay, there's some railings, but I think it'd be a mistake to put railings, these rail guards at the front end of the boat. They're such fine objects that there's only the slightest hint of them only, so be careful not to put those in too heavy. Take the angle over there back a bit. And now I'm going to go back to the big brush, because now's the time to deal with the reflections directly in front of the boat. And this is how to do it. So I'm back to the 1-inch flat. I put it in the water. I put the brush in the water to let it pick up water. And then I squeeze most of it out between my thumb and forefinger. And make sure make sure the brush is formed flat like this. Again, like a paddle. Okay. So I want you to place the brush on the paint that we put when we started painting the bottom of the boat, if you remember, on the water's edge. And I just want you to tease vertically down the paint off that line into that reflection. Okay. And we're very getting near the finishing touches. I'm just going to pick up a little bit of ultramarine blue here from my palette this time, not from the top of my jam jar lid. And we're making sure that the blade of the brush is nice and flat. Just put the odd ripple in, not too many. You can really sort of, if you're not careful, overdo this. Just the odd little ripple. I think that's probably enough. Further you go up here, the thinner hairline those little ripples get. Okay, it just infers a little bit of movement in the water there, or implies a bit of movement, whatever. So, okay. Now I'm going to do a shadow here. But before I do, I'm going to speed dry it very rapidly. So my shadow mix is going to be ultramarine blue and alizarin crimson. I've got some of that browny green color in this well here and in this one, to be honest. I don't think that's going to spoil. Well, this one might actually. There's a bit too strong down here. So I'll just get rid of what's in this well, but the little bit of contamination that mixing area there won't do the shadow any harm at all. This is probably just going to influence it too much, this one here. Okay, so ultramarine blue. Plenty of it. I might not use it all, but it's better to make more than you need. A little bit of alizarin crimson down here. Just show you that. So it's ultramarine blue from this well. Alizarin crimson from here. Makes that beautiful purple. Both transparent colors. So it's no surprise that you get a really beautiful transparent purple from it. Now, maybe there wasn't enough contamination from in this mixing area before I started. So I'm going to put a tiny bit more burnt sienna in there, just to knock it back a little bit so it doesn't look too artificial. So where do we go with this? I'm just going to put some more water in here too. So I'm just adding a bit of water off a spritzer here to make my shadow puddle go a bit further. So when I'm ready to put this shadow in, I have in my left hand a clump of tissue. So if I don't like what I do, it just comes straight off. It's as easy as that. It's no panic. But the safe place, really, I always start at the safest place. Well, I know that the shadow is going to probably be running across here into the buildings, mostly like this. That down here in this end of the building, we probably need to cut something, lose a little bit of that shape there, make it look slightly more abstract, that roof. And then the shadow again falls over here. Now the shadow edge that I've just created there has to be softened. So again, I will call on that flat brush and I'll just soften that. Not on the buildings. Don't soften the shadow edges on the buildings. Soften the shadow edges where they fall on the woodland behind.
Can we zoom out a bit, please?
That's okay. So I'm next going to shadow. I think because this boat here is playing second part, it's not the main player. I'm going to shadow most of it, but I'm still going to stay off the top edges that are catching the light. Okay. About here, I'll stop that shadow line and soften it again, because the turn of the angle on this boat here will allow more light on the front end of that little boat. Okay. Soften back there. Put a little bit of warmth in there, something like that. So Now is shadow. Now this might be the tricky one. We've got to show this boat off. So what we'll say is the canopy has got some shadow through it like this at the front end mostly. Okay, again, we want to soften everything off down the back end of this boat, down into nothingness, if you like, back there. But we'll shadow up here like this, picking up more shadow mix again, and we'll just shadow in here because this is a largish tree area. And so nobody can teach you actually how to make these shapes, folks. You have to, it's something you constantly have to practice. It's very intuitive to apply shapes like this. Just lose a bit over the top there and perhaps down between the boats, I think. Just along the boat line back there like this. And then I'm going to put a little bit more reflected shadow in the water, a couple of crisscross marks like this. Odd vertical mark maybe. Shadow over this foreground bank, a little bit here. Then I'm going to use a little bit of white gouache and we'll lift out some highlights. So once again, we're back to sticky paint. White, grab the tube of white paint. And just to sort of get yourselves loosened up again, you know, just put in a bit of spatter. Let's put a bit of summer. What goes on in summer around these canals? We'll have mooring ropes. I should be able to get in, despite the fact that that shadow color might still be a little bit damp. If the gouache is strong enough and it's straight out of the tube like this, it should be okay. We'll have a mooring rope at the front end, I think, up there, like this. I'll zoom back out in a minute, but I think it was really important for you to see what I was doing down here. And if you did lose that line along that gunnel there, this white gouache can be used, you know, to replace it. If I lost it back on that one, so it's like dark lines and white lines sitting on top of each other. Odd bit of white gouache in the canopy, just suggest a little bit of movement in that canvas. Lines that come down off the side of the boat here into the water. Even the odd, I'd be very careful with this, the odd horizontal bright sparkle over the water in these places like this. Let's put that down. And I'm just looking at it and thinking, well, we're nearly there. I'll just put a little bit of extra dark line in places. Back to the ultramarine blue and burnt sienna and the rigger brush. Incidentally, I was putting the white on with the rigger brush. And now anything that I can add to this that will really lift the area that I want to lift. So there could be more mooring paraphernalia around here. A couple of extra darks in the already dark areas. A couple of branches coming in off this nearer tree. This sort of tree almost overhangs the canal here. So you'd sort of expect to see some slightly darker, richer tones down here. A little bit of Spatter over the water surface here as things float on the surface. I think we're more or less there, folks. Yeah, let's see what that looks like. Now, is that area of that roof back there a little too stark? Is it a little too bright? I think it is. So I'm just going to do a 2-second trick here. Just throw it, pick any brush. Got a little 6-inch, a 6-inch, size 6 round brush here. And if I jiffy the area around, I'll make contact with the other paint that's on the edges of there. And it'll knock the white out of that roof a little bit. And that'll look a bit more natural because it shouldn't be quite that bright back there. I think that line there is fine along the top there, but it was as though the roofs were just that little too high in the mix. Let's put the mount around it and see what we've got. And I'll pan back out so you can see the painting.
There we have it, folks. I hope that was I hope that demonstration explained a few things for you in terms of reflections, direct painting, lines, etc., creating the abstract, and generally keeping everything loose. So with no further ado, we shall close this one, and I look forward to seeing you at the next session.